At 2:12 p.m., over the cold waters of the Baltic Sea, just off the coast of Kaliningrad, a dangerous confrontation was about to change the entire balance of power in the region. The Russian Su-27 fighter jet ripped through the sky at nearly 600 miles per hour, heading directly toward an American MQ-9 Reaper surveillance drone that had been monitoring military activity near Russian territory. The drone was unarmed, but it was one of the most valuable intelligence assets in the region. Every movement of Russian forces, every radar signal, and every military transmission could be tracked through its sensors. For NATO, it was an eye in the sky. For Russia, it was an unwelcome observer. As the Su-27 closed in, the Russian pilot performed an aggressive maneuver. The fighter crossed directly in front of the drone and released hundreds of gallons of jet fuel. The thick cloud immediately engulfed the MQ-9. Its cameras struggled to see through the haze, and its engine began choking on the fumes. But the encounter was not over. Seconds later, the Russian fighter banked sharply and moved even closer. Then came the impact. The wing of the Su-27 clipped the drone's propeller. The collision was brief, but the damage was catastrophic. The MQ-9 immediately lost stability and began a slow, uncontrollable spiral toward the sea below. The operators watching from thousands of miles away tried desperately to regain control, but there was nothing they could do. The aircraft continued its deadly descent until it slammed into the waters of the Baltic Sea. The drone was gone, and with it, a critical piece of NATO's surveillance network vanished from the battlefield. Almost immediately, another threat emerged. The moment the drone disappeared from NATO's screens, Russian S-400 missile batteries stationed along the coast became active. Their powerful radars swept across the region and locked onto nearby NATO warships operating in international waters. On the bridges of several American destroyers, warning alarms suddenly erupted. Every sailor knew exactly what that sound meant. A missile tracking system had found them. The Russian military had effectively cleared the skies of one NATO surveillance asset and now had targeting solutions on Allied naval forces. It was a clear signal. Russia was prepared to escalate. But instead of backing down, the United States responded with a move that Russian planners had not expected. At 1:04 on the operational timeline, 3 enormous C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft descended through heavy Baltic clouds and approached a forward operating base in Poland. The C-17 is one of the largest military cargo aircraft in the world, capable of transporting entire combat systems across continents in a matter of hours. As the aircraft touched down, their rear cargo ramps lowered, revealing the cargo that would fundamentally change the battlefield. The Typhoon missile system had arrived. Massive trucks rolled off the aircraft and headed toward pre-selected deployment zones across the Polish countryside. Once they reached their designated positions, hydraulic systems activated and lifted missile containers into vertical launch positions. Inside those launch cells sat some of America's most advanced weapons. Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-6 multi-role interceptors, long-range precision strike capabilities. But the true advantage of the Typhoon system was not its firepower. It was its invisibility. Unlike traditional missile batteries that are easily identifiable from space, Typhoon launchers resemble ordinary cargo trucks. To Russian satellites looking down from orbit, they appeared almost identical to civilian transport vehicles moving along highways. Suddenly, every truck on a Polish road became a potential missile launcher. The battlefield had become far more complicated. Behind the Typhoon units, another layer of defense was rapidly taking shape. Patriot missile batteries began deploying across key locations. Radar arrays were leveled and powered up, while crews worked around the clock to establish overlapping fields of coverage. Soon, powerful NMPQ-65 radar systems started scanning the skies. Their mission was simple: detect anything hostile, destroy it before it reached NATO forces. The Patriot system functions like an invisible protective dome. Any aircraft, missile, or projectile entering its engagement zone without proper identification immediately becomes a target. Yet even these batteries were only one piece of a much larger defensive network. The real punch came from the PAC-3 MSE interceptor missiles. Unlike older defensive missiles that rely primarily on explosive blasts, the PAC-3 destroys targets through direct impact. It strikes incoming threats with such overwhelming force that the target is physically shattered. As deployment continued, another critical component came online: the digital battlefield network. Through advanced communication systems, Patriot radars, Typhoon launchers, naval vessels, aircraft, and command centers were linked together into a single integrated combat architecture. The radar station could detect a threat in one location and instantly provide targeting information to a missile launcher dozens of miles away. Every sensor became everyone's sensor. Every weapon became everyone's weapon. The NATO shield was now taking shape. But Russia had anticipated many of these moves. Deep inside Kaliningrad, one of Russia's most powerful electronic warfare systems suddenly activated: the Krasuka 4. Unlike traditional weapons, this system does not fire missiles or shells. It fires electronic chaos. Powerful electromagnetic signals flooded the region. GPS frequencies became saturated with interference. Navigation systems struggled to maintain accuracy. Communications links experienced disruptions. For NATO forces, the battlefield suddenly became much darker. The Tomahawk missiles depended heavily on navigation data. Many precision-guided systems required uninterrupted signals. Russia was attempting to blind the enemy before delivering the first punch. And then that punch arrived. At 3:05 on the timeline, hidden deep within Russian territory, an Iskander-M ballistic missile erupted from its launcher. Flames and smoke exploded from beneath the missile as it accelerated skyward. Moments later, a second launch followed. Then, a third. 3 ballistic missiles climbed into the Baltic sky and turned toward NATO positions in Poland. The Iskander is particularly dangerous because it does not follow a simple ballistic arc. It can maneuver during flight, making interception extremely difficult. As the missiles raced forward at incredible speed, NATO radars struggled against the electronic interference generated by the Krasuka system. The Russian plan was brutally simple. Use electronic warfare to hide the attack, then strike before defenders could react. The distance between the missiles and their targets disappeared rapidly, more than a mile every second. Then something unusual appeared on NATO tracking screens. One of the incoming objects was traveling in a perfectly straight path toward the center of a Patriot battery. Its speed was extreme. Its behavior was suspicious. Analysts quickly realized what they were looking at. A decoy. A trap. The object was designed to force American defenders into launching valuable interceptors at a false target while the real warheads approached behind it. The decision facing NATO commanders was impossible. If they fired at the decoy, they might waste their defenses. If they ignored it and were wrong, an entire Patriot battery could be destroyed. As tension mounted, Patriot crews prepared for engagement. Missile launchers rotated. Tracking systems locked on. Operators waited for authorization. Every second mattered. At 4:27, the order finally came. Engage. 4 PAC-3 MSE interceptors blasted from their launch rails and accelerated toward the incoming threats. The battle for control of the Baltic had officially begun. 4 PAC-3 MSE interceptors exploded off their launch rails and raced into the sky. Unlike older missile defense systems that relied on large explosive warheads, these interceptors used a completely different method of destruction. They were designed to hit incoming targets directly, destroying them through pure kinetic force. The challenge was almost unimaginable. One of the incoming Russian objects was descending from the edge of space at nearly 4,500 miles per hour. The American interceptor was climbing upward at over 3,000 miles per hour. Both were moving at extraordinary speeds, and even the smallest calculation error would result in a complete miss. Inside the Patriot command network, operators activated a special radar mode designed to cut through heavy electronic interference. The AN-MPQ-65 radar focused its energy into a concentrated beam, burning through the electronic noise generated by the Russian Krasuka 4 system. For a brief moment, the tracking picture became clear. The first 2 American interceptors locked onto the suspicious object that had been identified as a potential decoy. Seconds later, one of the PAC-3 missiles adjusted its course and slammed directly into the target. A brilliant flash erupted high above the battlefield. The object vanished instantly. The Americans had been right. It was a decoy. But the victory was only partial. The 2 real Iskander-M warheads were still racing toward their targets. As Patriot crews focused on the incoming threats, another weapon entered the fight. Nearly 50 miles away, hidden among ordinary-looking Typhoon launch vehicles, an SM-6 missile suddenly launched into the sky. Unlike the Patriot interceptor, the SM-6 climbed to extreme altitude. It soared high above the battlefield until it could look down on the Russian missiles from above. Now the Iskander warheads faced danger from 2 different directions. Patriot missiles were attacking from the front. M6 interceptors were descending from above. The Russian missiles attempted evasive maneuvers. One Iskander suddenly changed direction, pulling a violent high-G turn designed to throw interceptors off course. Under normal circumstances, such maneuvers could defeat many missile defense systems. But the PAC-3 MSE had been built for exactly this scenario. Its small maneuvering thrusters fired in rapid sequence, allowing the interceptor to instantly reposition itself. The American missile jumped directly into the Iskander's flight path. Then came the collision. The impact was devastating. The PAC-3 smashed through the hardened body of the Russian missile with such force that the warhead never even had a chance to explode. The entire weapon was simply vaporized. One threat was gone. but the second Iskander remained alive. Using the debris cloud created by the first interception, the remaining missile temporarily disappeared from radar tracking. By the time NATO systems reacquired it, the warhead was already less than 5 miles away from the Patriot battery. At its current speed, it would arrive in only a few seconds. The Patriot launchers had a problem. Their ready-to-fire interceptors had already been expended. New missiles were still being loaded into firing position. For a brief moment, the Russian attack appeared unstoppable. Then the SM-6 made its move. High above the battlefield, the interceptor activated its onboard radar seeker. The missile searched through the chaos and quickly identified the heat signature of the incoming Iskander. Once locked on, the SM-6 adjusted its control surfaces and entered a steep vertical dive. The closing speed became enormous. The Russian missile had no time left. Less than 2,000 feet above the ground, the two weapons collided. The resulting explosion shook the surrounding area. Even the crews inside the Patriot battery felt the vibration through the steel structures surrounding them. The attack had been stopped. The defensive shield had survived. The cost was significant. Millions of dollars in interceptors had been used within minutes. But the NATO defensive line remained intact. Russian commanders immediately recognized a serious problem. As long as they continued launching missiles from land, NATO forces could keep responding with missile defenses. They needed another approach. A new plan was quickly set into motion. Several Starogushti-class corvettes departed Russian ports and moved into the Baltic Sea. These vessels were specifically designed for coastal warfare. Fast, heavily armed, and equipped with modern missile systems, they represented a dangerous threat to NATO positions. Their objective was straightforward: approach the Polish coastline. Launch cruise missiles from an unexpected direction, force NATO defenses to divide their attention. The Russian ships moved in formation through the Baltic waters. Their sensors continuously scanned for potential threats, while onboard air defense systems remained ready for action. If the ships could get within striking distance of the Polish coast, they would create a major challenge for NATO planners. But NATO had already prepared for this possibility. Hidden among forests and coastal terrain along Poland's shoreline were several mobile launch vehicles carrying one of the most lethal anti-ship weapons in service: the Naval Strike Missile, known simply as the NSM. Unlike traditional anti-ship missiles that relied heavily on radar guidance, the NSM used an advanced infrared imaging system. Its seeker could identify targets visually, almost like a human eye. As the Russian ships advanced, NATO commanders authorized engagement. 6 NSM missiles erupted from their launch canisters. After launch, they immediately descended toward the sea. Lower, lower, until they were flying only a few feet above the waves. This was sea-skimming flight. Because of the curvature of the Earth and constant movement of the water, radar systems often struggle to detect objects flying this low. To Russian sensors, the missiles blended into the surrounding environment. The NSMs accelerated across the Baltic at high speed. Instead of approaching directly, they followed carefully programmed routes that brought them toward the Russian formation from unexpected angles. The corvettes continued moving forward. None of their crews realized the danger approaching from the side. Only at the last moment did one Russian vessel finally detect the incoming threat. Alarms sounded. Defensive systems activated. AK-630 close-in weapon systems began firing thousands of rounds per minute. Streams of tracer fire filled the air. The ships attempted to build a wall of metal between themselves and the incoming missiles. But the NSM was designed to overcome such defenses. Using its onboard computer and imaging system, the missile identified individual ships and selected precise impact points. As the lead corvette attempted to react, the first missile suddenly climbed upward. Moments later, it plunged directly into the ship's bridge. The command center of the vessel disappeared in a massive explosion. The second missile remained low and slammed into the engine compartment near the waterline. The ship immediately lost propulsion. Fire and smoke erupted from multiple sections of the vessel. The remaining Russian ships attempted to scatter. It was too late. Additional NSMs locked onto their assigned targets. One corvette deployed electronic countermeasures, releasing clouds of metallic decoys designed to confuse incoming missiles. The tactic failed. The NSM ignored the decoys and maintained its lock on the ship's heat signature. Another direct hit followed. This time, the missile struck a section containing stored munitions. The secondary explosion was enormous. The blast consumed large portions of the vessel and could be observed by surveillance assets hundreds of miles away. Within minutes, the Russian naval breakout had collapsed. Burning wrecks now marked the locations where warships had been operating only moments earlier. The surviving vessels turned back toward the safety of Russian-controlled waters. NATO had successfully denied the Baltic approach, yet the battle was still evolving. As smoke drifted across the sea, a new sound appeared overhead. A low, distant hum. High above the battlefield, 2 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters were already in position near the edge of Russian airspace. They were not carrying out bombing missions. They were doing something far more important, acting as the intelligence and targeting brain of the entire NATO force. Using advanced sensors, the F-35s were mapping every radar emission, every communication signal, and every significant Russian military movement across the region. The information they collected was instantly transmitted through secure networks to NATO strike units on the ground. What happened next would threaten one of Russia's most important defensive systems, and it would demonstrate a capability that few military planners fully appreciated. The battle was entering a new phase.